Antoinette Briley's babies. In 2003, a waste management employee in Stickney, Illinois, made a horrifying discovery. 2 infants' remains were discovered by the worker in a garbage truck's front lift pocket. Their hypoxia caused their death. They were found to have been disposed of in a garbage can in a Stickney lane, according to investigators. Investigators made progress, but they still didn't know who was behind the babies left in a garbage can. The case quickly became unsolved. Subsequently, in 2018, investigators had the notion to try using DNA technology to find relatives who had been abandoned. They identified Antoinette Briley, a 41-year-old Michigan woman, as the mother after doing DNA tests. She was taken into custody by police in December 2020 after a traffic stop. That's when she admitted to the crime. She told the investigators this. In the time, she was 24 years old, and Ned was the only one in her grandfather's house when she gave birth to the children in her bathtub. She was terrified for several minutes while the babies were sobbing. After that, she made the decision to pack them in a duffel bag and head to the hospital by car. But on the way, she stopped, took the babies out of the bag, and threw them in the garbage. After leaving the duffel bag behind, she returned to her grandfather's house, watched TV, and went to bed. Antoinette has a daughter, which the investigators took note of and ensured is secure. This piece of trash does not yet have an attorney on file and is being detained on a $15,000 bail. Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Moving on to the next case. Blanca Ariano. Sometimes people act irrationally out of love and they don't regret it afterwards. However, in this instance, the victim we will speak about not only gave up her life for a one-sided love, but it also took it. Blanca Ariano, a 51-year-old Mexican, traveled 3,000 miles by plane from Mexico City to Lima, Peru on October 31st, 2022 with the intention of meeting 37-year-old Guam Pablo Villafuat, a Peruvian student studying human medicine and biotechnology at the Faustino Sanchez Carrion National University. The two were rumored to have met on a gaming hub and been dating virtually for a few months before Blanca, driven by excitement and heartbreak, flew to meet him in the hopes of finding real love. Her family claims that she frequently expressed her sentiments to Villafuat before departing for Peru and that she was content and at peace in their relationship. Blanca Ariano went missing after spending a week with Villafuat and told her niece that she had fallen in love with him. Her family was unable to get in touch with her for several weeks. When Blanca's niece Carla contacted Villafuat to find out why Ahanti had stopped answering calls and hadn't even called her family, she was the first to realize something wasn't right. When Kayla inquired about Blanca's well-being, Villafuat responded in a disrespectful manner, claiming that Blanca had chosen to leave him because he was unable to give her the opulent lifestyle she desired. He claimed that Blanca had grown tired of him and had gone to get an airline ticket home to Mexico. He told Blanca's family in their final conversation, "I hope she is doing well, but my role here is over. I say this with sadness because I have no idea what else is out there. She's probably running low on battery life or her phone is broken. I hope she returns home safely and I wish you well." In addition to trying to paint Blanca as a money-hungry gold digger who wasn't interested in love, he also attempted to dissuade her family from thinking that he was involved in any way in her abduction. Sometimes I wonder how murderers think. His assumption was that the Ariano family would overlook the reality that their daughter, aunt, and sister flew to meet him in person, only for her to disappear from sight a week after her arrival in his homeland. After Blanca remained silent for 2 weeks, her niece posted a need for assistance on Twitter. According to the post, "I never imagined I would be in this situation. However, I'm requesting your help today in order to share this message and locate one of the most significant and beloved people in my life. On Monday, November 7th in Peru, my aunt Blanca Olivia Aureliano Gutierrez vanished from sight. We are afraid for our lives." She went on to say that she had questioned Villafuat about her aunt's location, but he had never provided any useful information regarding the location of her hand Blanca. After this post went viral online and was shared numerous times, the Peruvian authorities decided to look into the situation. Sadly, on November 10th, they discovered an unsightly severed finger on the Ojo beach. There was still a silver ring on it, and it was claimed that the fingertips had been removed. The authorities discovered a faceless head and a ham a few hours later. At the end of a canal that empties onto the beach, they discovered a tozo the next day that was organ-free. Investigators quickly discovered that Villafuat attends Carrier National University, Joseph Aosunu Sanchez, and that the canal runs in front of the university. Experts in forensics had also shown that the victim's face had been removed by a skilled surgeon. It is regrettable that although the majority of medical researchers work to save lives, some, like Villafrosi, work to end lives. Blanca's family verified that the ring on her finger belonged to her, and the investigators concluded that the remains of her body, discovered at sea, belonged to her. Villarfoli's apartment had traces of Blanca Ariano's blood all over it. In Villarfoli's chamber, investigators also discovered women's clothing, hair, and a Mexican flag. It has also been stated that days after Hawkins vanished, he uploaded images and videos of her on TikTok. Villafuat was detained by police shortly after the finding on charges of femicide, organ trafficking, and human trafficking. Villafuat is currently being held by the police while the inquiry is ongoing, despite his denials of involvement in the crime. Blanca Ariano went to find love at the hands of a demon, who ultimately killed her, severed her body, and invested her organs. It is heartbreaking that this happened. Let us keep the Ariano family in our prayers and thoughts. Moving on to the next case. Christopher Alvin Daly. Christopher Alvin Daly, age 26, was a resident of Huntsville, Alabama. He was employed for a Hilton hotel in Huntsville. He was last observed during a staff meeting on April 25, 1995. His family never got home, so they filed a missing persons report for him a whole day later. Two 17-year-olds called the police an hour before Christopher was reported missing after they found a body near a former logging road that had a single gunshot wound to the head. When Decatur Police Department investigators arrived on the site, they were able to identify the body as Christopher Daly's. About 4 miles distant, part of Christopher's automobile, his wallet, and his ID were discovered submerged in a river. The case quickly became cold despite a thorough investigation that turned up no suspects, witnesses, recovered weapons, or reasons. A man named Johnny Dwight Whited called the Decatur Police Department at Alp cracked the cold case on November 18, 2020. He declared his desire to come clean about killing Christopher Daly. Sean McAdam, a police detective, was first dubious since Johnny could not recall the year. Sean got together with Johnny and the other detectives to act out the scene. Johnny was able to demonstrate to them all that had occurred, including the location of Christopher's car's plunge into the river. Given his grave illness, Johnny informed him that he wished to confess right away. He expressed regret and apologized multiple times. But it's not a justification. Even so, he killed someone, and he ought to have stepped forward years ago. Christopher's relatives were made aware. They appreciated the news. They thought there would never be a solution. Moving on to the next case. Daniel Linda Lagerlof. In 1969, Daniel Linda Lagerlof was born. In addition to directing motion pictures, he also oversaw a few Swedish TV shows. In 1997, Daniel tied the knot with Malin Lagerlof, his longtime partner. Together, they were parents to 3 kids. As a screenwriter, Mulaney frequently created scripts for her husband to helm. Daniel was hard at work researching a potential filming location in the Turpanen Nature Reserve on October 6, 2011. He never returned to his 3 children and wife. It's thought that big waves that were sweeping the region trapped Daniel on slick rocks, and he was pushed out to sea close to the sheer cliffs. There are no witnesses because he was by himself. Daniel Lint Lagerlof is still missing, as of this writing. Moving on to the next case. Darylyn Johnson. The case was horrifying because an innocent guy was on the verge of being executed without a warrant. For the better part of 2 decades, the unexplained death of Darrell Johnson was believed to be solved. Nevertheless, in 2001, it tragically resurfaced as a cold case. On February 24, 1982, at 8 a.m., every schoolchild in Nampa, Idaho had a normal day. Darrell Johnson, then 9 years old, was observed that morning strolling 6 blocks from her home to Lincoln Elementary School. Sadly, she never made it there. Concerned friends and neighbors, in addition to her family, responded to her absence by organizing a widespread search for her around the city of Nampa. But 3 days later, a couple of fishermen in remote Canyon County discovered Darlene's body close to the Snake River, putting an end to the extensive search for her. An autopsy revealed that Darlene had suffered blunt force injuries to her head and torso in addition to being sexually raped. The cops also collected male hair and DNA from the crime scene. Charles Fain, 34, was detained in September almost immediately after it was suspected that he had killed Darlene by rape. Charles Fain was arrested because of a hair sample he willingly gave to the police and because he lived a block away from the Johnson household. After being hauled into detention, Fain denied any involvement in Darlene's death. He also performed well on the polygraph exam. He passed the test and denied killing Darrell Johnson, but he was nonetheless charged with her murder. Prosecutors raised the likelihood that Fain was the owner of a shoe trail found near Darlene's body during his trial. Furthermore, 2 jail informants claimed to have heard Fain admitting to the crime. In exchange for their testimony, the 2 informants also received lower prison sentences. Fain refused to back down from his insistence that he was innocent in the face of mounting evidence. He stated that the neighborhood where Darrell was slain was 100 miles away from him. Despite the lack of strong evidence and trustworthy witnesses against Fain, the judge did not rule him out as a suspect based on the testimony of the other witnesses. The polygraph results of Charles Fain were admitted into evidence in court. Furthermore, there was not enough DNA evidence at the time to prove Fain's innocence. Fain was sentenced to die in March of 1984 after being found guilty on November 4, 1983. However, he was subsequently detained for almost 20 years. He was about 4 days away from being executed in 1991. Surprisingly, though, his execution date was rescheduled. 8 years later, in 1999, with a little more advanced DNA testing, it was confirmed that the hair DNA found on Darrell Johnson's body really belonged to an unidentified male and not Fain. Fain was then immediately cleared. In August 1999, he was released from the maximum security institution located in Idaho. Detectives revived the investigation in 2019, after a few years had passed, and the following year, they identified David Dalrymple as a suspect through the application of genetic genealogy. His DNA matched the sample found at the crime scene, and he was 64 years old. For kidnapping and molesting a child in 2004, Dalrymple was already serving a life term. In January 2022, he was formally charged with Darrell Johnson's murder. He is presently incarcerated and may shortly be executed or given a second life sentence. Conversely, Charles Fain feels relieved that the offender has been apprehended and is content that he is no longer behind bars. In exchange for his 18 years of incarceration and his incorrect conviction, he received a payment of $400,000. With some of the money he got back after his erroneous conviction, Fain recently bought a truck for himself. Moving on to the next case. Kim Marlene McVey. A woman's body was discovered on May 23, 1992, under a construction shed on North Memorial Drive, not far from Tulsa, Oklahoma. It didn't take long to identify her as Kim Marlene McVey, age 31. Kim had sustained a head wound. There was no DNA evidence and no known witnesses to the crime. The case fizzled out and no one came forward with any relevant information. However, witnesses have now come forward. They reported to the police that Tommy Edward Harris, a male, had admitted to them that he killed Kim. Kim was residing in the same house as Harris and a few other unidentified people. It was stated that the home was a well-known drug house. 7 days before her body was discovered on May 16, 1992, a guy entered the home to make amends for a botched transaction. This person requested a refund of his money. There was then a gunfight. This man grabbed Kim by the head and pulled her outdoors. Tommy Harris then received demands from the individual. Harris pulled a gun, striking Kim's left temple. Harris then hauled her body into the house and covered her corpse with the shed in the backyard. The arrest of Tommy Harris occurred on May 14, 2020. Vic Rigolado, the Tulsa County Sheriff, described the situation as bittersweet, resentful of Kim McVey for having a family. Although they were unable to come today due to being out of state, they have been notified. Without a doubt, our thoughts are with them, and sweet in the sense that her family can finally have closure thanks to us. Years went into creating it. Ultimately, though, justice is served even though it sometimes moves slowly. Since then, the individual who broke into the house demanding money has passed away. After learning about the arrest, Kim's family, who was not present at the police briefing, has likewise not yet released a statement. Moving on to the next case. Kirsty Gordon. Nestled amid the parklands that separate North Adelaide from the city centre lies the Adelaide Oval venue, a sports field that first opened in 1871. With a seating capacity of more than 53,000 people, it is a well-liked location for cricket competitions as well as rugby and football games. However, the Adelaide Oval abductions are arguably the most well-known incident for locals in Adelaide. The term used to describe the two small children who vanished during a football game in the 1970s. Joanne Ratcliffe, then 11 years old, left with her brother Frank, a family friend, and her parents, Les and Kathleen, on August 25, 1973. There was a football game between Norwood and North Adelaide on this day. Kirsty Gordon, age 4, was watching over her grandma from the maternal side next to the Ratcliffe household. Her parents, Greg and Christine Gordon, were visiting friends in the town of Renmark with their younger daughter, so they were not present. Every week, Joanne's family and Kirsty's shared a table and both had season passes. They thus got to know each other. Because of the high level of trust that existed between the two families, Joanne was permitted to go with Kirsty to the restroom that particular day. The Ratcliffes often forbade their kids from using the restroom during breaks or the final quarter, but on this particular day, they made an exception. Joanne and Kirsty went to the restroom at 3:45 p.m. Their folks started to get worried and started looking for them when they did not show up again after 15 minutes. Kathleen, Joanne's mother, tried to use the PA system at the venue to make an announcement, but she was turned down. After a second attempt, a report wasn't sent across the venue until 5 p.m. However, no one came forward and the girls stayed unaccounted for. Around 5:12 p.m., the missing was reported to the police. Authorities showed up on the spot without delay. After speaking with witnesses, they learned that the girls had been spotted multiple times during the 90 minutes between when they left for the restroom and when the announcements were made at the Oval. The two were initially observed as they tried to lure a stray cat that was skulking around with a few other kids. The second was when Kirsty was spotted being carried by an unidentified male. Joanne apparently looked upset during this time, punching and hitting the man while screaming at him. However, at the time, observers gave the occurrence no thought. They felt the youngster was just upset with her father and that it was a family issue. Joanne and Kirsty were last seen together on a bridge close to Adelaide Zoo. During a visit with her father, a 14-year-old girl recalled seeing a man with the two girls. She stated, "I saw a man approaching us quickly on the gravel path while carrying a small child," according to the investigation. A girl was racing to catch up with him and pounding him in the back as hard as she could while yelling at him to put her down. Set her down. And she was really angry. The girl described the man in the same way as the other people who had seen him inside the sports arena earlier. It's important to note that the poster claims a young male saw the girls last on Port Road, which is close to the North Adelaide train station. Private detectives surmised that the girls were removed from the vicinity from this station on a Red Hen train. Despite the high prominence and national attention this case garnered, the first inquiry quickly ran into trouble. A $5,000 prize was put up for information, but no significant leads materialized from the offer. It was difficult to accept that the girls had been abducted in broad daylight in front of 13,000 witnesses and that no one had identified the man responsible for the crime, but it seems that this is what happened. There has been conjecture in the years following the girls' disappearances that their case is connected to the notorious Australian case of the Beaumont children. in which 3 siblings, 9-year-old Jane, 7-year-old Anna, and 4-year-old Grant, vanished in the Adelaide region in 1966. Many of the suspects in the Beaumont case are also suspected in this one as a consequence of this potential connection. Witnesses in 1960 reported suspects in this one as well. Witnesses reported in 1966 that the Beaumont children were last seen with a tall, medium-built man with fair to light brown hair, a narrow face, and a tanned complexion. He looked like he was in his mid-30s. It's interesting to note that the description of the man saw with the Beaumont children and the man seen with Kirsty and Joanne before they vanished was similar in a police sketch. Bevan Spencer Von Enum, a suspected serial killer who was found guilty in 1984 of killing Richard Kelvin, a 15-year-old Adelaide boy, is one of the suspects in the Beaumont case. On or around June 5, 1983, Von Enum abducted Richard and held him captive for 5 weeks, torturing, drugging, and abusing him sexually. 7 weeks after his disappearance on July 24th in the vicinity of One Tree Hill, an Adelaide suburb, his body was discovered. Investigators nailed Von Enum down because Von Enum was one of the people with a prescription for the hypnotic sedative Mandrax, which was discovered in Richard's body. Von Enum's name also seemed familiar because he had been questioned over 3 young men's deaths and 1 young man's alleged sexual assault. The fibers recovered inside Von Enum's house matched those on Richard's clothes. Derek Ernest Percy, a suspected serial killer who was linked to the Wanda Beach killings, is another suspect in the Beaumont investigation, an unresolved case involving the 1965 January deaths of 2 girls at Sydney's Wanda Beach. Percy was taken into custody in 1969 after killing 12-year-old Yvonne Tuohy. Additionally, he had made an effort to kidnap her buddy, an 11-year-old child who would later recognize Percy's car. Despite being caught by the police wiping blood off his clothes, Percy first denied any participation, but he ultimately guided them to the little girl's body. Investigators discovered journals detailing and illuminating Percy's numerous sexual obsessions, which raised the possibility that he was harboring pedophilic tendencies. After being declared innocent during his trial due to his insanity, Percy was placed under police custody without charge or prosecution. At 64, he passed away in 2013 from lung cancer. The most likely culprits for the Adelaide Oval kidnapping are thought to be the last 2 suspects in the case. The primary suspect in the 1970 killings of Susan and Judith McKay was Arthur Stanley Brown. The 2 girls, who were 5 and 7 years old, were abducted one morning while they were strolling 300 meters from their Townsville home to school. Their bodies were discovered near Anthill Creek 2 days later. Susan had suffered a knife wound to the chest, a strangulation, and sexual assault. Judith, her sister, had been sexually molested and killed by strangulation. Brown was a suspect in the case from the beginning, yet he was able to live as a free man for almost 3 decades as a result of a poorly handled police investigation. Brown looks a lot like the police picture drawn during the incident at Adelaide Oval, where the man with the hat was observed carrying Kirsty and was struck by a distraught Joanne. Sue Laurie, a 14-year-old witness who saw the girls at the Adelaide Zoo, recognized Brown as the man who was with the girls on that particular day. 25 years after her last sighting, she identified him instantly when she saw him on a television show in 1998. Resuming her conversation with the under-investigation, Sue stated that she could visualize the culprit extremely well and knew right once that this man's face was the same one she had seen 25 years prior. Years later, I recognized him right away when I saw his portrait. That is the countenance. Although Brown frequently presented himself as a calm, courteous, and diligent worker who worked as a carpenter for the Queensland Department of Public Works, his relatives have fewer positive things to say about him. When I first met him, Merle Moss recalled, there was something different about him. I was just a young child. I was just not fond of him. Eventually, the family made it known that he had assaulted numerous young girls, but only the local girls. According to all reports, Brown was never reported to the authorities. Therefore, his horrifying, unlawful crimes went on for years with no consequences. Journalist Paula Donovan also said that he would commit his atrocities covertly. According to her, victims of child sex abuse frequently mention him wearing his maintenance uniform in their testimonies. He's the one at school who fixes stuff. One member of his family mentioned that he encouraged the pupils to address him as uncle. He would take a lot of his victims home with him, she continued, and attack them in the home he and his wife shared. Merle Moss remembered that somewhere on the property was a secret room he had. We discovered bottles of wine and a ton of literature that appeared to be actual accounts of women who had been raped and disfigured. We had no idea at the time that he was abusing young females in this way. Merle also recalled harboring misgivings over Brown and his potential involvement in the Townsville killings. Paula Donovan claims that when investigators arrived for him 28 years later, he was not taken aback. Brown was eventually charged with the offense in December of 1998. Around this same period, Sue Laurie recognized him from the news as the man she had seen with Joanne and Kirsty in 1973 as soon as she saw his face. Sadly, though, the jury was deadlocked during the trial. Despite the order for a retrial, Brown was deemed unfit for trial. He passed away in 2002 without ever having been found guilty of the killings in Townsville or the disappearances of Joanne and Kirsty. It's interesting to note that Stanley Arthur Hart, another Australian pedophile who is well known, resembled Brown and the police drawing. Until 2009, when a prisoner named Mark Trevor Marshall made a written confession stating that he and his grandfather, Hart, had been at the Adelaide Oval on the day that Joanne and Kirsty disappeared, the Adelaide Oval case had essentially come to a standstill. He asserts in the written article that his grandfather was the one who removed the kids from the event and then killed them. In 1999, Hart passed away. After obtaining a copy of the confession, journalist Brian Littlelay described it as horrifying and added that the girls had been kidnapped, taken into the country, and then slain. He expressed his opinion that Marshall might be speaking the truth because there were enough specifics in the notes. Interestingly, Littley doesn't feel this way alone. Private investigator and former police detective Bill Hayes has also said that there are details in there that make you believe he is knowledgeable about the subject. Susie, Joanne's sister, has also perused the notes and informed the investigators that an excessive amount of unquestionably true information and details are included. He has discovered information in there that he would not have known if he had not really met her. Hart allegedly had an interview after the 1973 event. Furthermore, Bill Hayes claims that a witness thinks he saw the two little girls at Hart's house a few days after they vanished. Authorities raided two of Hart's properties in 2015, one in Prospect and the other in Yetana. The Prospect house had an underground bunker which was filled in 1975 following the disappearances, but it was abandoned at the time, and Hart was the only one with access to the residence starting in 1973. It was his childhood residence. In the meantime, there were two wells on the Yatina property's grounds that had been dug up. Regretfully, neither property yielded anything noteworthy. In 2013, Joanne's sister requested that the police investigate the background of their family friend, Frank, who was present on the day the girls disappeared, and whether or not he was connected to the incident. She remembered that he was someone who was well versed in the customary actions of the girls during football games. Frank also left his seat for about 30 minutes before the girls vanished, according to Joanne's mother. Later, when the family started to worry that they were missing, he stayed seated and did not assist in the search. Frank's peculiar behavior had also been noticed by Kirsty's grandmother. Whether he was ever questioned about the disappearances is unknown. The case of Kirsty and Joanne remains unresolved, as they have never been discovered. On August 25, 1973, the two girls vanished from Adelaide Oval, a sporting facility. It was Joanne Ratcliffe's 11th birthday. She was a white girl with brown hair that was pulled back in pigtails at the time of her disappearance. Her clothes consisted of a black tank top, black jeans, white shoes, white socks, and a white shirt. Her build is medium. She was escorting 4-year-old Kirsty Gordon to the bathroom when she vanished. Kirsty is a white female with blue eyes and blonde shoulder-length hair. She had a light complexion with subtle freckles and stood 3 feet 4 inches tall when she vanished. She has 2 birthmarks, one below the hairline and one at the base of her spine, along with a small scar above the bridge of her nose. She had on a purple pullover, brown lace-up shoes, white pantyhose, and a white pleated skirt when she was last seen. Anyone who gives information leading to the remains' discovery or information leading to a conviction is still eligible for a reward of up to $1,000. To report any information on this matter, call Crime Stoppers at 1800-333-100. Moving on to the next case. Christa Bramlet. In 1996, Christa Bramlet, then 23 years old, lived in a mobile home near New Providence, Tennessee. Formerly a sleepy railroad town, New Providence was annexed by the neighboring town of Clarksville. Over the next few years, New Providence saw a surge in drug-related offenses and commercial burglaries, along with growing crime rates overall. Unfortunately, Christa Bramlet became a victim of these issues. Her killer remained at large for 22 years before being apprehended. Christa Bramlet was born in 1973 to Jim Langley and Kim Venable in California. Christa was well known for her intelligence, kindness, and wit. Her relationship with her family was close, but she decided to live alone and become financially independent. Before her mother relocated to Corpus Christi, Texas in 1995 with Christa's 2 small children, the 2 of them shared a house in Clarksville. Christa desired to remain in Clarksville so she could complete her GED program there. After that, she pursued her high school equivalency despite living alone in a mobile home in order to provide her 2 children a better life. Her neighbor perceived her as cold, despite her family's description of her as kind and loving. Jeff Pennington, Christa Bramlet's landlord, knocked on the door of her trailer in the Sunnydale Mobile Home Park, which is located off of Peachers Mill Road, in the afternoon on October 28, 1996. Christa was contacted by the landlord to talk about a fire that happened a week prior, but she never replied. But later, when Jeff tried to get in touch with Christa, he found out something horrible. He noticed Christa Bramlet's shoeless figure in the living room, lying in the flickering light of a tiny colored television. Then I phoned the police, claimed a scared Jeff Pennington. At the time of Christa's murder, Clarksville, Tennessee police were investigating many house homicides of women. The killings, according to the police, had nothing to do with the particle case. Following Christa's death, the mobile home was examined by the Clarksville Police Department crime scene team, which was searching for any evidence that could lead to Christa's killer. The Montgomery County Medical Examiner conducted Christa's autopsy. The autopsy determined that Christa Bramlet had suffocated to death, and evidence of a rape kit contained evidence of sexual abuse. In an attempt to locate a match, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's lab received the forensics DNA results from the rape kit and put the information into CODIS. In an attempt to find possible witnesses, about 6 police interviewed between 50 and 60 neighbors at the start of the investigation. On October 27, 1996, a neighbor reported seeing Christa sitting on her porch, as was her usual. However, Christa tended to be aloof and people avoided her company. After receiving close to a dozen tips, the police anticipated making an arrest within a week. However, the leads dwindled. There were no possible suspects found. Years went by without anyone being arrested. It wasn't until February 13, 2019, 22 years later, that Clarksville Police Department Detective Michael Urey received the information he so desperately desired. As it turned out, the suspect's DNA from Christa's rape kit eventually matched that of a suspect who lived in Phoenix, Arizona. Cody's DNA matched that of Kenneth Hudspeth, a 48-year-old man. Hudspeth had not yet been mentioned in the investigation, according to Detective Michael Urey, and no one had taken notice of him. Detective Urey discovered that Hudspeth had actually resided in Clarksville at the time of Christa's murder and had left the city in December 1997 when he met with the suspect in April. Hudspeth did not dispute every detail that was given to him. He identified himself as Christa's friend and said he was the last person to see her alive. The DNA evidence from this interview led to the arrest of Hudspeth and charges of homicide. He was spared extradition and moved to Tennessee pending trial. Hudspeth's arrest records revealed to investigators that he had been arrested several times for charges including felony assault and domestic abuse. He has spent time behind bars in Arizona and Texas. His DNA ought to have been in Cody's years ago, but investigators believe that swabs may have been lost or damaged in the chain of custody. Hudspeth claimed that while living in the Sunnydale Mobile Home Park in Clarksville, he had previously engaged in drug use with Christa Bramlet. The toxicology result by Christa Bramlet, which showed a low blood alcohol concentration, disproved these claims. He first denied having sex with her when asked, but he acknowledged that he had been so intoxicated that he couldn't remember if he had sex with her after viewing the autopsy results and the DNA discovered within Bramlet and on her bra. I was high on drugs. She is someone I know. Have I slept with her? Speaking in court, Hudspeth remarked, I don't remember that. I just can't image me killing this woman and raping her. He stated it again. I hope I didn't. Upon learning of a development in the case, Christa Bramlet's relatives were notified. It was only a question of time, as I always understood. We were always confident that they would identify the perpetrator. According to Christa's grandmother, 52-year-old Kenneth Hudspeth was found guilty by the judge and given a life sentence for the murder of Christa Bramlet in January 2022, capping a grueling 22-year ordeal. Moving on to the next case. Laura Ann Huizar. Judy Marie Huizar and Jose Luis Huizar welcomed Laura Ann Huizar into the world on May 10, 1972. At the age of 11, she was abducted, subjected to sexual assault, and ultimately slain violently while she was a sixth grader at Chester Amer Elementary School. On Sunday, November 6, 1983, about 1:30 p.m., Laura disappeared while traveling home from a friend's home in St. Lucie County, Central Florida. Her last known location was 2G's Market. She was carrying an armful of garments as she made her way home after spending the night at a friend's place. Her parents called the friend she was with after realizing she hadn't come home, and they were informed that she had left hours earlier. Her folks were expecting the worst. Laura never lived on the streets for very long. After searching the region in vain, they decided to report their daughter missing to the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office. Officers at the time did not consider the young girl's disappearance to be worrisome since they believed that teenagers who do not arrive home on time are usually playing with their friends and have become disoriented. When it came to missing teenagers back then, the police usually didn't take them seriously until they had been gone for a longer amount of time. Although Laura was never the subject of a thorough search, authorities posted a bolo sheet. Soon after, a St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office deputy named James Howard Harrison came forward to report that he had spotted the young girl strolling close to a gas station. It seemed that James Howard Harrison was out on patrol the day Laura vanished. He gave the time he'd roughly seen her and then said he'd continued his patrol. Our Laura Ann was short for her age, but she was a strong, independent woman. Her relatives said she was very aware of her surroundings and would never have entered a vehicle with an unknown person. On November 9, 1983, 3 days after Laura Ann disappeared, 2 men found her dead in a drainage ditch not far from the petrol station where she was last seen. Asphyxiation was found to be the cause of her death, and her body was immediately submitted for an autopsy. She had been sexually assaulted and then fatally strangled. The police launched a murder inquiry, but they were unable to gather any concrete evidence from the location of the killing. In order to remove any tangible evidence, the murderer moved Laura Ann's body from the scene of the crime and placed it in a drainage ditch. Based on his actions, it appeared that the murderer had handled evidence and committed crimes before. The authorities found evidence of male DNA on Laura's body. The DNA was stored in a sexual assault kit because, at the time, no one could match it with. DNA testing and the criminal database weren't advanced enough in those days to provide the authorities with any leads regarding the murderer. Eventually, the files from the St. Lucie County Police Department regarding Lorraine's murder investigation went cold. In 2020, the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office established a dedicated cold case squad, and as a result, Laura Ann's case was given another look. Detective Paul Taylor was in charge of the investigation. Numerous flaws in the first study were promptly found. Detective Paul Taylor, who was shocked to be the only officer other than Deputy James Howard Harrison to talk with one of the men who had initially discovered Laura's body, conducted an interview with the man. The discovery had been quite upsetting for him, therefore he had vivid memories of that day and the crime scene. "Every time I close my eyes, I picture that young kid lying there." The man continued, telling investigator Paul Taylor all he had witnessed that day. However, the detective was taken aback to discover that his version conflicted with the details in Laura Ann's file. Detective Paul Taylor stated, "I've already gone through the case file and the photos from the crime scene, and what they're telling me doesn't match what I'm seeing." Interviewing the witnesses, he learned that one of their own deputies had pushed them away and then removed Laura's body from the original crime site. The witness stated that Detective James Howard Harrison was the first to arrive at the crime scene when they phoned the police to report finding Laura Ann's death. The individual said Harrison sent them away after getting a few brief statements from them. They never heard from anyone at the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office again about the case after that. Harrison was found to have spent 20 minutes alone himself at the crime site prior to the arrival of other officers. The inquiry was completed quickly. Suspects remained unidentified, and the matter was swiftly shelved for nearly 40 years. Detective Paul Taylor made the decision to investigate Deputy Harrison's past further after hearing this testimony. And what he found was devastating. Detective Paul Taylor named James Howard Harrison, a former deputy sheriff for the Lucie County Sheriff's Office, as the main suspect in the murder of 11-year-old Laura Huizar in February 2022. Harrison has been a pastor and employed by 10 different police enforcement agencies since the 1960s. The last individual to see Laura alive was him. While she was strolling home, he abducted her, molested her, killed her, and disposed of her body in a drainage ditch. 5 months after Laura was killed, Harrison was found to have been let go from the sheriff's office. He was being accused at the time of having raped multiple underage girls in his church. Harrison's fellow deputies had also voiced complaints about him, claiming that over the course of his work as a deputy, he had acted inappropriately near young females. "Actually, I'm standing there telling the victim's family that one of our deputies was the one who carried out the crime." Taylor, the stunned detective, replied, "It's rough. Regretfully, Harrison died before the authorities could take him into custody for Laura Ann's rape and murder. 2008 saw his cancerous death. However, in 2020, a warrant was acquired by the detectives to remove his body from the cemetery in order to get a DNA sample. By then, though, Laura's crime scene's DNA had degraded too much to match the sample recovered from Harrison's corpse. But they are positive that James Howard Harrison, the former deputy, killed Laura Huizar. According to the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office, witness testimony, evidence manipulation, and Harrison's history of sexually abusing young girls lead them to believe that Harrison killed Laura Ann. 5 months after Laura Huizar was murdered, investigator Taylor said Harrison was forced to retire from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office and his church due to his inappropriate behavior with young adults. Harrison's DNA was added to both federal and state databases by investigators. His DNA is currently being examined in several Florida cold cases to determine how many additional victims he had. Joe, Laura's elder brother, was utterly shocked that his sister's murderer might at last be identified when the Laura N. Who is our cold case was officially concluded. After all this time, it was only reasonable to feel like a dream of disbelief. "Are you saying that you know who killed our younger sister?" stated Joe. The Huizar family was disappointed with what they believed to be a subpar investigation at the time Laura was killed, but they also expressed gratitude to investigator Paul Taylor for his hard efforts in solving this case. They also stated that they wanted to speak with every investigator involved in the case in 1983. "We believed that things were willfully ignored and not taken care of." The Huizar family claimed that the investigation had enormous holes in it. Guys, what are your thoughts? Did the former deputy abuse children all the time he was a deputy sheriff and a preacher, or did he do it for the entirety of his life? How do we defend our women against these strong males who use the legal system and other institutions to achieve their own nefarious agendas? Kindly provide your thoughts in the space provided for comments below. Moving on to the next case. Mary Catherine Edwards. In 1995, Mary Catherine Edwards, at 31 years old, resided in Beaumont, Texas. She was a well-liked educator with a big social network and a close-knit family. Mary was last seen at her recently purchased townhouse on the evening of Friday, January 13, 1995. When she did not answer her phone the next day, her parents became worried. When they arrived at her house to see how she was doing, they discovered a horrifying scene. It was Mary who had drowned in her own restroom. Her hands were behind her back when she was shackled. She had also been beaten, an autopsy indicated. Her body contained male DNA, which the investigators extracted and preserved for later use. There was no resolution to the lawsuit for over 25 years. Then, in April 2020, detectives started utilizing genetic genealogy to identify potential suspects. They were getting closer to an arrest when they discovered a number of distant cousins. They eventually located Clayton Bernard Foreman thanks to the DNA. Mary and Foreman went to the same high school. In addition, they were casual pals. Mary even attended Foreman and his first wife's wedding as a bridesmaid. Additionally, investigators discovered that the incident against Mary resembled an assault that one of Foreman's high school classmates had experienced in 1981. After entering a guilty plea, Foreman was placed on 3 years of probation. Foreman was accused with killing Mary Catherine Edwards when he was taken into custody in May 2021 in Franklin County, Ohio, where he resided. Foreman was charged on September 22, 2021, a Wednesday. The trial's date has not yet been announced. Moving on to the next case. Mary Mathis Davis. On May 30, 1987, Mary Mathis Davis, a 29-year-old mother of 2, disappeared from Lexington. Her family and friends were shocked to learn of her abduction. The community was stunned to find her body the next day, hidden behind a nearby supermarket. Before a breakthrough in 2023, the case remained unsolved for over 30 years, despite the police department's best efforts. In this scenario, we are in the North Carolina city of Lexington. Lexington is renowned as the barbecue capital of the world due to its well-known barbecue and rich and varied cultural history. Beyond its delicious food, Lexington boasts a quaint downtown filled with unique shops and restaurants that capture the spirit of the friendly city. The city's historic Uptown Lexington district is well-liked by tourists and features exquisitely restored early 19th century architecture. Mary Mathis Davis was born in Lexington on February 12, 1958. Even so, hardly much is known about her formative years. Lisa Hinkle was her sister, and she grew up with her. Nothing could ever separate Mary and Lisa since they were so closely bonded. Lisa characterized her sister as a kind, understanding individual who could always make a space seem more cheerful with her infectious smile. It was also reported that Mary had a gift for making others feel comfortable. Mary had the opportunity to meet Richard Davis when the two reached adulthood. As they got to know one another, a spark started to grow between them. And before they knew it, a passionate relationship had overtaken them. Richard Davis knew he wanted to live out the rest of his life with Mary as their love developed. One day, out of the blue, he asked Mary to marry him, and Mary was thrilled. He proposed to her, and she accepted without hesitation. After Richard proposed to Mary, they immediately began to look forward to starting a family together. They shared their dreams and hopes for the new life they were about to start, talking for hours on end about what was ahead of them. The pair exchanged vows in a lovely and intimate ceremony as the big day drew near. Mary and Richard started a new chapter in their lives after the wedding and looked forward to the voyage that lay ahead. The years went so swiftly, and Mary and Richard soon had 2 beautiful kids. Tracy was the second child, and the first was a female. Mary loved her children dearly and relished every moment spent with them. Her heart was full of love. Later, in order to provide for her growing family, she took a job at Lanier's Ace Hardware in Lexington. It wasn't the most glamorous work, but Mary didn't mind. She was grateful for the opportunity to earn a steady income. Mary didn't make much money, but even so, it was plenty to cover her expenses and put food on the table. Despite the challenges of juggling the responsibilities of motherhood and a job, Mary was committed to providing the best life she could for her family. Things moved along at a steady rate as the days became weeks, and then those weeks became months. Although Mary was content on the inside and her family was doing well, disaster was always present and could strike at any time. Mary got out of her house as usual on May 30th, 1987 to go to work. She had no idea that Saturday would be her last day on Earth, even though it seemed like any other Saturday. Mary greeted her co-workers and smiled when she arrived at work before beginning her shift. She began her assignment with much enthusiasm. But as the hours went by, she became more and more restless and hungry. Her stomach was complaining by midday, so she patiently awaited meals. She was relieved to be able to leave the four walls of her employment when the moment finally arrived. She planned to treat herself to a lovely dinner. To determine if she had enough money for lunch, she opened her purse, and she left her store and headed to a nearby restaurant once she was positive she did. After this, no one would ever see Mary alive again. She never returned to her job. With every second that passed after her lunch break, her absence became increasingly apparent. Her cow laborers were curious as to why it was taking her so long. The minutes felt like hours, and their perplexity turned to worry. There were no signs of her return, so they realized they had to find her fast. Without hesitation, one of them offered to go look for her in the restaurant where she had lunch. Heart-thumping, the coworker ran to the restaurant, but Mary wasn't there. The problem was becoming worse, and neither the restaurant personnel nor the management could help. The employee said that she had not seen Mary at the restaurant when she returned to the hardware store. The staff of the hardware store became terrified as soon as they heard this and realized they had to take this more seriously. Without waiting any longer, they grabbed up the phone and phoned the emergency number. The cops showed there relatively immediately after being briefed on the incident. In order to let Mary's parents and spouse know what was going on, the co-workers also called them. That day, the police immediately began searching for Mary, but initially they turned up nothing. Word of her disappearance spread, leaving the neighborhood in a state of anxiety and confusion. She was entirely out of sight. Mary's family, on the other hand, was left to bear the suffering of not knowing where she was or what had happened to her. However, they prayed and hoped that their beloved Mary would be discovered to be okay. Richard struggled to fall asleep that night. He was awake at night thinking. He sensed that his family was going to have a major issue. It did not make sense to him, and that's when he understood Mary's disappearance was not a simple case of getting lost in the city. His thoughts strayed to their children and how he would greet them the next day. The naive children had been asking Richard about their mother, not realizing that she might be in danger. Richard could not handle the thought of having to inform them that she might not come back, but he knew he had to be there for his children no matter what. When the sun came up the following morning, the search continued for Mary. However, it appeared as though all the work was in vain. The authorities and Mary's family were frantically looking for any information on her unexpected disappearance. As the day went on, the police unexpectedly received a call informing them that a dead corpse had been found behind the Winn-Dixie store. A few police officers raced to the area as soon as they received the call. Upon witnessing a small gathering surrounding the body's discovery, the police swiftly intervened to ensure the area was secured. They could see that the body had been there for a while. A faint smell of decay was already beginning to emanate from it. Upon closer inspection, they were able to identify the body as that of Mary Mathis Davis. The cops' expressions conveyed shock and amazement, but they also realized that they had to investigate further. The reason of death was not immediately apparent. Thus, the police immediately began searching the area for any potential clues. They also asked the supermarket employees about the victim's fate, but none of them seemed to know much about it. After that, the body was taken away for an autopsy. On the day Mary's death was found, one of the police officers arrived at her family's residence. The officer informed her family of the devastating news while the mood was heated. He conveyed his sympathies and the limited details they have on Mary's encounter. The news was devastating, to be sure, since Mary's family was devastated and distraught. When Mary's autopsy results were released a few days later, it was found that she had been strangled to death. It was also discovered that she had been the victim of sexual assault. This led to the classification of Mary's death as a homicide. While Mary's family continued to grieve and to remain strong, the authorities began to investigate her death. The detectives had a lot of unanswered questions, and they were determined to uncover the answers. As pieces of evidence, investigators had DNA samples taken from the crime scene. However, at the time, there wasn't much that could be done with this because of the lack of sophisticated DNA technology. Despite this drawback, investigators worked day and night, assiduously following up on every lead and tip that came their way. They eventually made an appeal to the public for help in the hopes that someone would come forward with information that would help unravel the mystery surrounding the case, but all of their attempts were in vain. It seemed as though the murderer had disappeared off the face of the planet, leaving the detectives feeling helpless. The killer appeared to have escaped as the days stretched into weeks and ultimately months. But Mary's family never gave up and never doubted that in the end, justice would be done, no matter how long it took. Though they tried their best to move on, the wounds from their loss never fully healed. Lisa, Mary's sister, came forward and talked to the public almost 25 years after Mary was killed, detailing the sadness and suffering her family endured when Mary was taken from them. She opened up to the media about their suffering and how hard life had been without her beloved sister at her side. Lisa thought back to their pleasant times together with Mary and realized that the family had never given up faith that they would one day achieve the closure they so dearly needed. She disclosed that the family was willing to forgive Mary's killer and that they had no desire for retaliation, despite the suffering and loss. In 2022, a fresh team of investigators assigned to Mary's murder case decided to look over the available data. They were aware of the advancements in DNA technology and felt that in contrast to 1987, they had a greater chance of solving the case. The detectives then gave the North Carolina State Crime Lab some concrete evidence. The positive findings of the evidence analysis prompted a call to the North Carolina Bureau of Investigation to investigate the matter. Everything moved more quickly after that. The State Bureau of Investigation contacted Othram, a private forensic genealogy laboratory located in Texas. A DNA fragment of the evidence was then transmitted to Othram, where researchers used it to build a family tree of possible suspects. After months of careful work, the man suspect who was initially unidentified was ultimately recognized. Mary Mathis Davis was murdered, and her killer was identified as Russell Grant Woods. After making the discovery, the investigators were relieved since they knew the case was solved. But there was an issue. A background check revealed that the murderer had died in 2013 at the age of 58, so there was no way to bring him to justice. Although Russell Grant Wood had been identified as a suspect in the case earlier, insufficient evidence at the time compelled detectives to divert their attention. In addition, it was discovered that Mary and Russell Grant Wood were acquainted before to her passing. However, the nature of their relationship remains uncertain. The state would have proceeded with indictments and charged Russell Grant Wood with first-degree rape, kidnapping, and murder if he had been living. On February 3, 2023, Mary's surviving family was informed of the case's breakthrough. They expressed gratitude to the investigators for their dedication to the probe. We prayed that we would one day track down the individual who brutally killed our dear Mary. Now that we know some answers. While it won't make Mary return, that does provide us with a feeling of resolution. Mary's niece, Lori Martin, informed the media that her family celebrated Mary's memory with a memorial celebration at Forest Hill Memorial Park on February 12, 2023. It would have been her 65th birthday if she had survived. We were fortunate to have Mary for the length of time we did since she was a light in this world. She was a devoted wife, sister, friend, and mother. According to Lori Martin, we know she is resting easily in the arms of our Lord and Savior. Even though the murderer has been apprehended and the mystery behind Mary's death has been unraveled, there are still a lot of unanswered questions. In what way do you believe Mary and Russell were connected? Share your thoughts with us by posting them in the comments box. Moving on to the next case. Patty Krieger. Patty Krieger went trekking on Sauk Mountain, which is close to Rockport, Washington, with her dog, Bear. Larry Lee Presley, their lover, and a handful of his family members were also with them. Larry and his family said they were on top of the mountain to disperse the ashes of their late parents, who had died a few months earlier. They claimed that Bear and Patty followed a separate route. They expected the trails to intersect. Bear and Patty did not appear at the bottom. Larry and his family went to the grocery shop to get food instead of waiting. They went back to the mountain after 4 hours, and only then did they report Patty missing. Larry claimed to be Patty's family to the police for an unknown purpose. This implied that Patty's biological family was not informed of her absence right away. Her manager informed her son Alan after she failed to show up for work the following day. Larry refused to let Alan inside his mother's home, despite Alan's best efforts. Interestingly, Patty's phone was in the possession of one of Larry's buddies, and the offender had both Patty's driver's license and keys. Larry drove her automobiles around town instead of his own, and he destroyed everything she owned inside the house. Additionally, he and his family were not collaborating. She confided in a co-worker that she was afraid Larry might harm her less than a month before she vanished. Every day, Patty's relatives witnessed searches in the mountains for her. They really believed that Larry was involved in her disappearance. Moving on to the next case. Rachel Johnson. In 1991, Rachel Johnson, a single mother, resided in Akron, Ohio. She was in a friend's car in March of that year when they experienced a flat tire. They arrived in the convenience store parking lot located at the intersection of Dan Street and Glenwood Avenue. Behind them, a small, worn gray car entered the parking lot. After getting into that car, Rachel left with the man. The man allegedly offered to drive her home, but her body was found on Weller Avenue later that day. She was beaten, stabbed several times, and after being left in the street, even set on fire. DNA evidence was gathered from Rachel's body by investigators. They tried searching databases with it, but they were unsuccessful. A match could only be established in 2019 thanks to an alliance between Advanced DNA and the Akron Police Department. Texas-based Advanced DNA is a genetic testing company that has recently played a major role in the resolution of numerous cold cases. Daniel Lee Reese, 57, was detained in relation to the case in March 2020. His DNA was the same as the suspect's discovered back in 1991 at the crime scene. Reese was admitted to the Summit County Jail. He would have been 28 years old at the time of the offense. Rachel's family seems to know him. Though he was never investigated during the first investigation, Reese had been spotted in the same region where she was last seen alive. Additionally, Rachel lived directly across the street from Reese. He would frequently see her daughter, who had moved in with Rachel's mother, after he killed her. The girl had no idea that the man she had known since childhood was also the one who had killed her mother. According to Detective James Pashilik, the DNA will help solve this case. The case was broken by that. In addition, he compared it to attempting to locate a needle in a haystack, and we have in this instance. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with us. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps us bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.